I am 35-year-old Evelyn Evie Vance, the great failure of the Vance dynasty, a military family in Washington, D.C. They scoffed when I left West Point, but they never knew I didn't quit. I was recruited. Tonight, at my father's gala, they would ignore me again, unaware that a single encrypted text in my pocket could command men more powerful than they'll ever meet. Driving to Fort McNair, I held on to a foolish sliver of hope. But inside the glittering ballroom, the final humiliation came from my aunt. In front of a general, she asked loudly, "Evie, dear, are you still slapping labels on storage containers at the Department of Energy?" An icy chill shot down my spine. My throat tightened, words failing me, as I could only manage a practiced, hollow smile. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family? If you know that unique pain, comment. I see you. Stay with me, because you're about to watch this invisible woman rewrite her family's entire legacy. That practiced, hollow smile was my shield, a mask I had perfected over decades of Sunday dinners in my family's Georgetown brownstone. These dinners were not gatherings, they were mandatory rituals of quiet judgment. Tonight was no different. I sat in my simple gray dress, a ghost at my own family's table, trying to take up as little space as possible. The air was thick with the rich scent of my mother's beef Wellington and the suffocating weight of unspoken rules. Across the table, my father, retired Admiral Richard Vance, spoke only to my sister, his voice booming with pride as he discussed her upcoming promotion. "Captain Caitlin Vance," he tested the title, his eyes gleaming. "It has a good ring to it." My mother, Eleanor, a woman whose posture was as rigid as her social standards, subtly corrected the way I held my fork. A slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head was all it took. I adjusted my grip, the familiar sting of inadequacy tightening in my chest. The clinking of heavy silverware against the Royal Doulton china was the only sound that acknowledged my presence. It felt like I was an understudy in the grand play of the Vance family, a role I was never meant to truly fill. All I wanted was for the evening to end. After the meal, we moved to the living room, the heart of the house, where a fire crackled in the hearth. This was the stage for the evening's main event. My father stood before the mantelpiece, a place of honor reserved for family portraits and military awards, and produced a worn, dark blue velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what it was. The Vance heirloom ring, passed down through generations. He opened it, revealing the brilliant diamond nestled inside. He didn't even glance at me. His focus was entirely on my sister. He took the ring and slid it onto Caitlin's finger. It was a perfect fit. Then he finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes, the same shade of steel gray as my own, were cold and dismissive. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone that cut deeper than any shout, "is for someone who is worthy, Evie, someone who understands and carries the family legacy. You will never understand." The words hung in the oppressive silence of the room, an official verdict on my entire existence. My mother nodded, a serene, satisfied smile gracing her lips. She approved of this judgment. Caitlin raised her hand, admiring the sparkle of the diamond under the lamplight. She shot me a look, a toxic cocktail of triumph and pity that made my stomach churn. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms, the sharp pain a welcome distraction from the crushing weight in my chest. I had to get out. "I need some air," I managed to say, my voice a strained whisper. I escaped to the back porch, the damp, cold DC air a shock to my heated skin. I stood under the sprawling, ancient magnolia tree, its dark leaves a familiar silhouette against the city glow. I fought back the tears, refusing to give them the satisfaction. They had taken everything else. They would not take my tears. Just then, a silent vibration came from my coat pocket. Not my personal phone. This was a different frequency, a different world. I pulled out the device, a sleek, encrypted communicator as thin as a credit card. The screen glowed with a single line of text. Anya, the name they didn't know, the person I truly was. I took a deep, steadying breath, the cold air filling my lungs and clearing the fog of pain. Reaching into a hidden compartment of my wallet, I retrieved my own ring. It was platinum, not gold, with a deep blue sapphire at its center, the symbol of the directorate. I pressed the ring to the device's screen, a soft chime, a flash of green light. I looked back through the window at the perfect family tableau by the fire. They thought they had defined me. They thought they had won. A real smile, the first of the night, touched my lips. They think I'm not worthy, but do they have any idea what worthy truly means? The cold platinum of the sapphire ring felt heavy in my hand as I drove away from Georgetown, a stark contrast to the diamond one I was denied. It wasn't the first time they had written me out of their legacy. The first time it was done not with words spoken over a fireplace, but with black ink on a legal document, a quiet and permanent act of erasure. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced as the city lights blurred past my windshield. It began with West Point. My departure wasn't the act of weakness my family portrayed it to be. It was an ascension. I still remember the scent of old books and floor polish in General Thompson's office, the founder of the directorate and my grandfather's closest friend. He was a man who saw past the quiet, awkward girl my family saw, and recognized a mind suited for the intricate, silent wars of the modern age. He didn't see a failure, he saw a weapon. The ceremony was secret, attended by only 3 people, but the weight of the oath I took that day was heavier than any medal my father could ever display. I wasn't dropping out, I was being recruited into a world my family couldn't even comprehend. Of course, they never knew that. To them, my leaving was a catastrophic failure, a public stain on the pristine Vance name. The fallout was swift and brutal. My father, the admiral, didn't speak a single word to me for 6 months. It was a quiet punishment, a suffocating silence that screamed his disappointment louder than any tirade. I would see him at the breakfast table, his jaw tight as he read the Wall Street Journal, my presence completely ignored. My mother's disapproval was more theatrical. There were tearful phone calls, dramatic sighs, and lamentations to her friends from the country club about how she had failed, how her youngest daughter had thrown away every advantage. "I just don't know what we're going to tell people," she'd wailed, her primary concern, not my well-being, but the family's social standing. Caitlin, ever the golden child, perfected the art of condescending pity. "I just feel so bad for her," I overheard her telling a friend. The pressure was just too much for poor Evie. Her sympathy was a sharper blade than my father's silence, twisting the narrative into one of my own frailty. But the true, calculated nature of my exclusion was revealed a year earlier, when I was 21. I had just had a terrible fight with my father. I'd refused to apply to law school at Georgetown, a path he had preordained for me. He saw it as the only respectable civilian career for a Vance who wouldn't serve. I saw it as another gilded cage. Later that evening, seeking refuge in the quiet of his mahogany-paneled library, I saw an envelope on his desk, It was from Covington and Burling, the ancient D.C. law firm that had handled my family's affairs for a century. A tremor of unease went through me. I shouldn't have looked. But some instinct, some need to understand the forces shaping my life, compelled me. My hands trembled as I slid the documents out. It was an updated draft of my father's will. I scanned the pages, the legal jargon blurring until my eyes snagged on one paragraph. There it was, my name, Evelyn Vance, with a single, brutal black line drawn through it. It was crossed out from the list of primary heirs, alongside my sister. The document then detailed my new, diminished status. I was to be the beneficiary of a small trust fund, but even that came with strings attached. The funds would only be released upon my demonstration of maturity and adherence to the core values of the Vance family, a vague and impossible standard to be judged solely by my parents. It was a legal tombstone. They hadn't just been disappointed in me, they had been actively, legally, and financially writing me out of their lives. The air in the library grew cold and thin. I could hear the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of my new reality as an outsider. I was officially, contractually disowned. The memory of that cold, hard paper made the sapphire on my finger feel warmer, heavier with a different kind of meaning. It pulled me back to another memory, a counterpoint to the library's suffocating silence. It was the day General Thompson gave me this ring, just before my first deep cover assignment. We were in his Spartan office, a place that valued function over form. He poured me a cup of hot black coffee in a thick ceramic mug. He looked at me, his eyes kind but piercing, seeing the hurt I tried so hard to hide. "Your family," he began, his voice a low rumble. "They have their legacy. It's built on parades, press conferences, and polished brass. It's a fine legacy, for what it's worth." He paused, letting the words settle. "But there is another kind of legacy, Evie. It's the one your grandfather and I believed in. It's the legacy of silent service, built in the shadows by people who will never be thanked, whose victories will never be celebrated." He opened a small, unassuming box and revealed the sapphire ring. It wasn't as large or flashy as the family diamond, but its deep, star-like blue seemed to hold a universe within it. "This ring," he said, placing it in my hand, "is a symbol of that other legacy. It's more valuable than any diamond because it represents not what you inherit, but what you protect, not who you are, but what you do when no one is watching." He gently took my hand and slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. "Richard may see a legacy of stone and gold," he said, using my father's first name with a familiar ease. "But you, Evie, you are now part of a legacy of quiet sacrifice. Never forget that." That promise, that anointing, had become my only true inheritance. It was the foundation I built my life on when the ground beneath me had been legally cut away. General Thompson gave me a new legacy, but he couldn't give me a new family. If my own parents could so coldly write me out of their lives, what was left to believe in? Who could I possibly trust, if not myself? The question of trust echoed in the sterile silence of my Arlington apartment. Trusting myself was the only option I had left. My life became a meticulously constructed duality, a constant, exhausting performance. I would drive my sensible Toyota Camry from the secure government parking garage back to this small, impersonal apartment. It wasn't a home, it was a safe house, a station of operations. Everything was neat, gray, and devoid of personality. There were no photographs on the walls, no sentimental knickknacks on the shelves. Just secure lines, reinforced doors, and the constant low hum of encrypted servers. This was the lonely architecture of the life I had built. By day, I was Evie Vance, the quiet policy analyst at the Department of Energy. I wore nondescript pantsuits, attended mind-numbing meetings about energy grid regulations, and ate my lunch, a prepackaged salad from the cafeteria, at my desk. I was forgettable, invisible by design, a ghost in the bureaucratic machine. My colleagues knew me as polite but distant. They didn't know that the dull reports I filed were covers for intelligence I was feeding to the directorate. But when the sun set over the Potomac, Evie would cease to exist. The door would be locked 3 times, the security system engaged, and the blackout curtains drawn. In the blue glow of my monitors, I became Anya. My evenings were a blur of decoding intercepts from foreign agents, analyzing satellite imagery, and managing assets in volatile regions of the world. Dinner was usually a Stauffer's frozen lasagna or a handful of almonds eaten without tasting, my eyes never leaving the streams of data. The faces of the agents I directed, people whose lives depended on my decisions, were just code names and pixelated images. I was forbidden from forming attachments, from even remembering their real names. It was a necessary, soul-crushing part of the job. Sleep was a luxury, a series of short, fitful naps, often interrupted by alerts from halfway across the globe. Some nights, the exhaustion was a physical weight, a crushing pressure behind my eyes. On those nights, I would get in my car and just drive. I'd head south on I-95, away from the city's sterile glow, deep into the rural heart of Virginia. My destination was always the same, a 24/7 Waffle House off a forgotten exit. Its bright yellow sign a beacon in the darkness. I'd slide into a worn vinyl booth or sit at the counter, the air thick with the smell of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee. I would order a black coffee and a plate of blueberry pancakes. The night shift waitress, a kind older woman named Marge with tired eyes and a warm smile, got to know me. She never asked what I did or why a young woman was always alone at 2 a.m. She just kept my coffee cup full. "You look beat, honey," she'd say, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes and small talk. "Eat up, you need your strength." That simple, unearned kindness from a stranger was an anchor. In that brightly lit, greasy spoon diner, surrounded by truck drivers and night workers, I wasn't Evie or Anya. I was just a tired woman eating pancakes. For a few precious moments, I felt human. One night, back in the sterile silence of my apartment, I was reviewing the after-action report for Operation Winter Sun. It was the mission that had cost General Thompson his life and nearly cost me mine. A sudden, sharp pain radiated from my left shoulder blade, a familiar ache from an old wound. I reached back, my fingers tracing the jagged, raised line of the scar beneath my shirt. A permanent souvenir from a piece of shrapnel. It was a physical reminder of the price of this life. I had traded everything for it. I had traded a family, however broken, for a life of secrets. I had traded the possibility of love for the certainty of duty. I had traded a normal life of backyard barbecues and holiday gatherings for the cold, lonely burden of power and responsibility. Staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor, I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my jaw. Was it worth it? The question hung in the empty room, a silent accusation. The safety of the nation rested on my shoulders, but my own soul felt terrifyingly, profoundly alone. The oppressive loneliness of my Arlington apartment felt a world away, as I drove through the winding, tree-lined roads of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air here was different, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. My destination was Ravenwood, the clandestine research and development facility that was the heart of the directorate. Tucked away in a secluded valley, hidden from satellite eyes and civilian curiosity, this place was more of a home to me than my family's house in Georgetown had ever been. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. As I passed through the final unmarked security checkpoint, a familiar figure was waiting for me on the steps of the main building. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne. A living legend in the Special Forces community, Thorne was a man carved from granite and gunpowder, with eyes that had seen more than most history books contained. He had been General Thompson's right hand for 30 years, and now he was my most trusted ally. He was the only person in the entire organization who knew my full story, the only one who had permission to bypass protocol. As I stepped out of the car, he gave a short, respectful nod. He didn't salute. He didn't call me director or Anya. "Evie," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound that was strangely comforting. "Good to have you back." Just hearing my real name, spoken with simple, unadorned respect, made the tension in my shoulders ease for the first time in days. Here, I wasn't the disappointing daughter or the enigmatic director. I was just Evie. Later that evening, after a long day of briefings on the Chimera Protocol, I found myself in Thorne's office. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, high-tech labs that filled the rest of Ravenwood. His office was a small, quiet space that smelled of old leather, gun oil, and strong coffee. The walls were lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of military history tomes, and the only decoration was a framed photograph of his old unit in Afghanistan. He motioned for me to sit in a worn leather armchair as he retrieved a bottle of top-shelf Kentucky bourbon and 2 heavy crystal glasses from a locked cabinet. He poured 2 fingers of the amber liquid into each glass, neat, and handed one to me without a word. I took a slow sip, the warmth of the bourbon spreading through my chest, chasing away some of the lingering chill from my family's dinner. Thorne settled into his chair behind his large oak desk, studying me with his knowing, steady gaze. He didn't rush the silence. He let it sit between us, a comfortable quiet that I never experienced anywhere else. "You look troubled," he finally said, his voice calm and direct. "More than usual. Was it your family again?" The question was so straightforward, so devoid of judgment, that I found myself answering honestly. "My father," I said, my voice quiet. "He gave Caitlin the heirloom ring, told me I wasn't worthy of it." Thorne didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it didn't matter. He just nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his eyes. He knew my family's dynamics almost as well as I did. He listened as I recounted the cold words, the dismissive gestures. He was a rock, absorbing the impact of my pain without flinching. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his bourbon. "Be careful, Evie," he said, his tone shifting from paternal to professional. "Your family's a distraction, but there's a real threat on the horizon. Marcus Gallo is back on the grid." My blood ran cold. Gallo was the rogue operative responsible for the disaster of Operation Winter Sun, the man whose ambition had gotten General Thompson killed. "He's working as a security consultant for a defense contractor with deep ties to the Pentagon," Thorne continued. "He hasn't forgotten that you were the one who exposed him. A man like that doesn't forgive. He waits." The news landed like a lead weight in my stomach. The warmth of the bourbon vanished. Thorne saw the change in me, He leaned forward, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. He didn't pull out a file or a mission directive. He pulled out a worn, creased photograph of a smiling woman and a little girl with bright, laughing eyes. "My daughter and my granddaughter, Sarah," he said, his gruff voice softening with affection. He slid the photo across the desk for me to see. "This, Evie, is real family. It's not about bloodlines or last names. It's about who stands in your corner when the whole world is against you. It's about who shows up." He looked me straight in the eye. "General Thompson loved you like a daughter. He saw you as his true successor. And for what it's worth, so do I. You are his legacy, not your father's. Don't you ever forget that." His words were a shield, a suit of armor for my weary soul. For a moment, I felt the profound weight of my loneliness lift. I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. I had an ally. I had a family, not of blood, but of choice, forged in shadows and bound by loyalty. The warning from Elias Thorne about Marcus Gallo echoed in my mind for days. A low-frequency hum of impending danger. So when my mother's number flashed on my secure phone a week later, my guard was already up. I was in the middle of a systems diagnostic at Ravenwood. The cool, controlled environment, a world away from my family's chaotic dynamics. I let it ring twice before answering. "Evie, darling," her voice was honey-sweet, a tone she reserved for public appearances or when she wanted something significant. It immediately set off alarm bells. "Your father and I were thinking, it's been too long. We'd love to take you to dinner at the inn at Little Washington. Just the three of us, a real family evening." A real family evening. The words were a carefully chosen lure. And the inn at Little Washington, that wasn't just dinner, it was a stage. A 3-Michelin-star restaurant nestled in the Virginia countryside. It was the Vance family's preferred venue for orchestrating major life decisions, business deals, and most often, ultimatums. It was where they had announced Caitlin's appointment to the Naval Academy, and where they had informed me they were cutting off my college fund after I switched my major from political science to cryptography. My logical mind, the Anya part of me, knew it was a trap. The warning about Gallo was too fresh, the timing too convenient. But the Evie part, the neglected daughter who still existed somewhere deep inside me, clung to a sliver of irrational hope. Maybe this time, a foolish voice whispered, "It will be different." I agreed. The drive to the restaurant was a quiet battle within myself. I chose my outfit with the precision of a field agent preparing for a mission. A simple, elegant black dress, professional but understated. Armor. The inn was as opulent as I remembered, plush carpets, impossibly intricate floral arrangements, and the hushed reverence of diners paying a small fortune for edible art. My parents were already seated at a secluded corner table. My mother, in a Chanel suit, smiled brilliantly as I approached, a public display of maternal affection that felt utterly hollow. My father, the Admiral, stood and gave me a stiff, formal hug that felt more like a pat-down. The first hour was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. They were charming. They asked about my work at the Department of Energy with feigned interest. They reminisced about a happy childhood vacation to Martha's Vineyard, a memory carefully edited to exclude any of the usual tensions. They ordered a bottle of exorbitantly priced Cabernet Sauvignon and insisted I have a glass. It was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion of a loving, functional family. The food arrived, delicate plates of seared foie gras and truffle-dusted scallops, but I could barely taste it. The knot in my stomach tightened with every passing minute of their charade. Finally, as the dessert plates were cleared, My father leaned forward, steepling his fingers. The performance was over. "Evie," he began, his voice shifting from warm patriarch to commanding officer, "we have a small family matter to discuss." He spoke of an old friend, a man named Robert Taggart, who owned a major defense contracting firm. Taggart's company, he explained, was in the running for a massive, multi-billion-dollar energy infrastructure contract, but was facing some bureaucratic headwinds. "I know you work at the Department of Energy," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "You're in a position to hear things. We're not asking for much, just some internal insight. A heads up on the competition's bids, perhaps a good word with the right people." He paused, letting the weight of his request sink in. "It would be a great help to Taggart, and in turn a great help to this family. It's time you started acting like a Vance again, Evie. Prove that you're still one of us." There it was, the transaction. Love and belonging in exchange for a felony. The air grew thick, the silence broken only by the distant murmur of other diners. I placed my fork down on the linen tablecloth, the small click loud in the tense quiet. I looked directly into my father's eyes, my own voice emerging calm and cold, a tone he had never heard from me before. "The internal insight you're asking for is classified information, Father. A federal crime." I didn't stop there. I let the second shoe drop. "And your friend, Mr. Taggart, his firm, Taggart Dynamics, is currently under a quiet federal investigation for its financial ties to a certain security consultant." I let the name hang in the air between us. A man named Marcus Gallo. The color drained from my father's face. He was stunned into silence. My mother, however, immediately went on the defensive, her polished mask cracking. "Evelyn, that's a dreadful accusation," she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "You're always so dramatic, making everything so complicated. Your father is simply asking for a small favor for your family." But I saw the truth in their shocked expressions. They knew about Gallo, and they didn't care. They were willing to use me, to risk my career and my freedom, to settle a debt for a corrupt friend. The last fragile ember of hope inside me died, turning to cold, hard ash. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had fundamentally misunderstood who I had become. I slowly folded my napkin and placed it on the table. My decision was made. The silence in my car on the drive back from the inn was heavier than any argument. I knew my refusal wasn't just a no, it was a declaration of war. I didn't have to wait long for their first strike. 3 days later, I was summoned to the office of my direct supervisor at the Department of Energy, a bland, by-the-book man named Mr. Henderson. His usual placid demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of grave concern. He closed his office door, a gesture that immediately sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "Evelyn," he began, avoiding my eyes and shuffling papers on his desk, "we've received a disturbing communication, an anonymous one." He slid a printed email across the desk towards me. I picked it up, my hands steady despite the tremor starting deep inside. The email was a character assassination, cloaked in the language of civic duty. It painted me as an unstable individual, citing a troubled history of noncompliance and insubordination during her time at West Point. It suggested that my quiet nature was not professionalism, but a sign of potential psychological instability, and concluded by ominously questioning if I was truly suitable for a position with access to sensitive government information. It was a smear campaign designed to destroy my career and my credibility. My eyes scanned to the bottom of the page, to the metadata the IT department had managed to pull. The email had been sent from a public terminal. A public terminal located in the library of the Army and Navy Club, the exclusive DC institution where my father had been a member for 40 years. It was his handiwork. He hadn't just been angry, he had acted. He had tried to burn down the one small, quiet life I had built for myself, all because I had refused to break the law for him. The pain was sharp, but it was quickly being consumed by a cold, rising tide of fury. I drove straight from my office to the Navy Yard, to the gleaming glass and steel condominium building where my sister lived. I didn't call first. I bypassed the doorman with a flash of my government ID and took the elevator straight to her penthouse. Caitlin opened the door, dressed in athletic wear, a look of surprise on her face that quickly morphed into annoyance. "Evie, what are you doing here?" she asked, blocking the doorway. I held up the printed email. "This," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "This is what I'm doing here. Did you know about this?" She glanced at the paper, her eyes flicking over the words. For a moment, a flicker of guilt crossed her face, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the familiar Vance defensiveness. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Caitlin," I said, stepping past her into the apartment. "The Army and Navy Club, that's his sanctuary. You knew he was going to do something." She finally broke, her voice rising with indignation. "He's our father, Evie. You humiliated him. You refused to help the family, refused to do one simple thing after everything he's done for you." "Everything he's done for me," I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. "You mean disowning me? Or trying to get me fired from a job he thinks is beneath me?" "You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" she shot back, her words laced with years of resentment. "Hiding away in your little government job, judging all of us. You defied an admiral of the United States Navy. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Dad just wanted to teach you a lesson about loyalty." That was it. The final clarifying blow. Teach me a lesson. In their twisted world, I was the one who was wrong. My refusal to commit a crime was an act of disloyalty that required punishment. The last vestiges of pain inside me solidified into something hard and unyielding. The part of me that had always hoped, always yearned for their approval, died in that moment. In Caitlin's luxurious, sun-drenched living room, I turned and walked back to the door without another word. "Where are you going?" Caitlin called after me, a note of uncertainty in her voice. I paused at the threshold but didn't look back. "To learn my lesson," I said. The drive back to my apartment in Arlington was a blur of cold, clear-eyed rage. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer about being ignored or unloved. This was about survival. They didn't just want to control me. They wanted to destroy me. I walked into my safe house, locked the 3 locks, and went directly to my workstation. The anger wasn't hot and chaotic anymore. It was focused, a laser beam of pure, undiluted resolve. I sat down, my posture perfect, and looked at the sapphire ring on my finger. I remembered General Thompson's words, "A legacy of silent service, what you do when no one is watching." For years, I had protected this country from its enemies in the shadows. Now, I had to protect myself. My fingers flew across the encrypted keyboard, the clicking of the keys the only sound in the room. I composed a new message, my purpose absolute. I addressed it to Thorne. The subject line was simple: Activate Chimera Protocol. The body of the message was even simpler: Target acquisition, Marcus Gallo, and all associated assets. I stared at the words for a single silent heartbeat. Then I hit send. The send icon on my screen flashed once, a digital point of no return. Less than 60 seconds later, my secure line buzzed with an incoming call from a protected number. It was Thorn. Anya, his voice was all business, stripped of the warmth from our earlier conversation. The game was on. "I've received your directive. What's your first move?" "Get me a skiff," I ordered, using the acronym for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. "And get our best network analysts. We're going hunting." Within the hour, a sterile conference room deep inside Ravenwood had been transformed into a war room. The quiet hum of high-powered servers replaced the silence. Giant wall-mounted screens glowed with complex data streams, charts, and satellite maps. Thorn stood by my side, a silent, imposing presence, while two of our top analysts, a young prodigy named Diaz and a veteran named Chen, typed furiously at their terminals. In this room, I was not the timid Evie Vance. I was Director Anya, and the cold, calculated rage that had propelled me here had now settled into a state of hyper-focused clarity. This was my element. "Diaz, I want a full workup on Marcus Gallo's digital footprint for the past 5 years, I commanded, my voice crisp and clear. Financial transactions, known associates, shell corporations, encrypted communications. I want to know what he had for breakfast. Chen, focus on Taggart dynamics. I want to see every dollar that has flowed between Taggart and Gallo. Follow the money." For the next 48 hours, we worked relentlessly, fueled by black coffee and a shared sense of purpose. The screens filled with a complex web of deceit. We uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, ghost employees on Taggart's payroll, and encrypted messages that hinted at a much larger network of corruption. It was clear that my father's friend wasn't just helping Gallo, he was a key partner in his schemes. My plan began to form, a 3-pronged strategy. First, expose Gallo's current illegal activities. Second, sever his financial lifelines by linking him to Taggart. Third, and most importantly, set a trap so perfect that he would walk into it himself, implicating everyone involved. The key to that trap, I realized with a grim sense of irony, was my own sister. "Thorn," I said, pointing to a flagged log file on the main screen. "A few weeks ago, an unauthorized access attempt was made on a legacy drive I once used. The attempt came from a terminal here at Ravenwood, using a naval officer's credentials." Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Caitlin," he stated, not as a question. "Yes," I confirmed. "She didn't get through, but she left a digital fingerprint, a breadcrumb. Gallo is a master of counterintelligence. If he's been monitoring my family, looking for a way in, he would have seen that attempt. He would interpret it as a weakness, a sloppy mistake by a disgruntled family member, a potential vulnerability to exploit." A plan crystallized in my mind. "We're going to use that breadcrumb. We'll create a honeypot, a decoy server that mimics a classified Pentagon network. We'll seed it with what looks like top-secret drone schematics, incredibly valuable data, and we'll leave a single, subtle entry point that appears to be linked to Caitlin's failed hack. We're not just setting a trap for a hacker. We're baiting Gallo's ego. He'll believe he's outsmarting my stupid little sister to get to me. But to make the trap truly effective, I needed an ally inside the Pentagon, someone with the authority to convene the right people at the right time. There was only one logical choice, and it was a risky one. I placed a secure video call to Colonel Eva Madsen, the formidable head of the Directorate's Internal Security Division. Madsen was a sharp, no-nonsense officer who had, in the past, viewed my unconventional methods with suspicion. Her face appeared on the screen, her expression impassive. "Director Anya," she said curtly. I didn't waste time. I laid out the entire operation, from my father's request and my refusal, to the anonymous email and my subsequent investigation into Gallo. I told her about the honeypot strategy, and I didn't hide Caitlin's involvement. I told her everything, laying my cards on the table. It was a calculated risk. Exposing my family's dysfunction was a vulnerability, but transparency was the only way to earn her trust. Madsen listened without interruption, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, processing. I could see the gears turning behind her steely gaze. "You're using your own family's disastrous attempt to subvert you as bait for a high-level intelligence operation," she said finally, a note of something I couldn't quite decipher in her voice. "You're putting your entire career and the directorate's reputation on this one play." "Yes," I replied simply. A slow, thin smile spread across her lips. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile. "I like it," she said. "It's audacious, it's clean. You have my full support, Director. Tell me what you need." The pieces were in place. The weapon was assembled. I looked at the screen where Diaz had just finished setting up the honeypot server. "Now," I said to Thorne, a cold calm settling over me, "we wait for the snake to take the bait." The bait was taken. 2 days after we set the honeypot, Marcus Gallo, blinded by his own arrogance, triggered the final alert. Believing he had successfully infiltrated a high-level Pentagon server, he initiated a full data transfer. The trap was sprung. The next morning, I found myself in the one place I had spent my life trying to avoid being judged, a secure hearing room in the Pentagon. The room was a sterile, windowless box designed for secrets and interrogations. The air was cold, recycled, and thick with tension. Seated around a polished mahogany table were some of the most powerful figures in the U.S. military and intelligence communities. A 3-star Air Force general, the deputy director of the NSA, and several other high-ranking officials. And at the far end of the table, seated next to each other, were my father and my sister. Admiral Vance was there in his capacity as a respected senior advisor. Captain Caitlin Vance was present as a person of interest, the supposed origin of the security breach. I sat opposite them, a low-level analyst from the Department of Energy, the designated scapegoat for the day's proceedings. Elias Thorne stood against the back wall, a silent, unreadable statue. The star witness, of course, was Marcus Gallo. He was brought in, not as a suspect, but as the expert consultant who had uncovered the breach. He strode into the room with an air of smug confidence, dressed in an expensive suit, a picture of corporate success. He shook hands with the generals, his smile smooth and practiced. He nodded condescendingly at me. My father and sister looked on, their expressions a mixture of grim satisfaction and anticipation. This was it. This was the stage for my public execution. Gallo began his presentation, his voice confident and clinical. He used a laser pointer to highlight complex network diagrams on a large screen, weaving a convincing narrative of a significant data exfiltration. He spoke of sloppy security protocols and a vulnerable entry point that he had traced back to a specific user's credentials, Captain Caitlin Vance's. He then artfully suggested that the breach likely originated from someone close to her, someone with a history of instability and a lower security clearance. He never said my name, but every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the weight of their suspicion, the silent judgment. I met my father's gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only a cold, hard finality. He believed this. He wanted to believe this. Caitlin wore a mask of concerned professionalism, but I could see the triumphant glint in her eyes. In conclusion, Gallo said, turning to the panel, this represents a catastrophic failure of internal security. The individual responsible must be identified and dealt with immediately to prevent further damage to our national security. He sat down to a murmur of grave agreement. The trap was perfectly set. But it wasn't for me. The 3-star general cleared his throat, ready to pass sentence. But before he could speak, Colonel Eva Madsen, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "General, if I may," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Thank you for that theatrical presentation, Mr. Gallo. Before we proceed, I believe it's crucial we hear from the individual with the highest authority on non-traditional threats in this room." A confused silence fell. The general looked at Madsen, then around the table. "And who would that be, Colonel?" Madsen turned her head, her gaze locking directly onto me. Her voice was clear, precise, and echoed in the stunned silence of the room. "Director Anya Vance, of course. Director, perhaps you could shed some light on this situation for us?" Time seemed to stop. Every head swiveled in my direction. The sound in the room was a collective, sharp intake of breath. I saw my father's jaw literally drop, his face a mask of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. His eyes, which had been so cold and judgmental moments before, were now wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Beside him, Caitlin went pale, a ghostly white. Her professional composure shattered, revealing the raw shock beneath. She stared at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. Across the room, I saw the barest hint of a smile touch the corner of Elias Thorne's lips. I rose slowly from my chair. The mousy, invisible Evie they had all come to condemn was gone. In her place stood Anya, the director of the directorate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Thank you, Colonel Madsen," I said, my voice calm and carrying an authority that silenced any potential interruption. "Mr. Gallo is correct about one thing. There has been a data breach. However, it was not a breach of our systems. It was a breach into his." I nodded to Thorne, who tapped a command into a tablet. The main screen behind me changed. Gallo's confident presentation was replaced by a live feed of his own encrypted network. The entire data leak, I explained, my voice cold and precise, was in fact a honeypot operation, designed and executed by the Directorate. We seeded a decoy server with phantom data, these drone schematics Mr. Gallo was so proud of finding, and led him to it using a digital breadcrumb he believed was a vulnerability. I walked towards the screen, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the generals, then landing on Gallo, whose face was now a mess of sweat and panic. For the past 72 hours, every keystroke Mr. Gallo has made, every encrypted message he has sent, every dollar he has moved, has been logged by a Trojan horse he willingly downloaded onto his own system. The screen split, showing Gallo's offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, detailing illegal wire transfers to shell corporations. It showed encrypted emails between him and Robert Taggart, discussing their plan to use my father to pressure me. It showed everything. The web of deceit was laid bare for everyone to see. Mr. Gallo was not uncovering a threat, I concluded, turning back to the panel. He was the threat, and he has just delivered his entire criminal enterprise directly to us. As I finished speaking, the heavy doors at the back of the SIF swung open. 2 stone-faced men in dark suits and FBI windbreakers entered the room. They walked directly to Gallo, who was frozen in his chair, his face ashen. "Marcus Gallo," one of the agents said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, espionage, and multiple violations of federal security laws." As they pulled him to his feet and snapped handcuffs around his wrists, the room was utterly silent. The generals, my father, my sister, they were all statues, paralyzed by the whiplash of the last 10 minutes. The war with Gallo was over. The heavy doors of the skiff closed behind the federal agents, leaving a profound silence in their wake. I didn't look at the defeated generals or the stunned officials. My eyes found my father and my sister. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Fear and utter, complete disbelief. The reckoning with my family had just begun. The meeting was adjourned. The generals and officials filed out of the Tsaoyef with new, guarded respect in their eyes, some offering me stiff, formal nods I barely noticed. After the heavy doors closed behind the last of them, a profound silence descended. Thorne gave me a single, understanding nod from across the room before quietly excusing himself, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my family. For a long moment, the three of us just stood there, frozen in the cold, sterile light of the Pentagon hearing room. The reckoning had arrived. My father was the first to find his voice. The shock in his eyes had curdled into a dark, sputtering rage. He followed me as I collected my things, his footsteps heavy on the tiled floor. He didn't wait until we were out of the room. He cornered me near the door, his face flushed, and his voice a low, furious growl. "What have you done, Evelyn?" he hissed, his use of my full first name a clear sign of his fury. "You humiliated me. You dragged the Vance name through the mud in front of my peers." I turned to face him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear. The years of intimidation, of cowering under his disapproval, had been burned away in the fire of the last week. I looked him straight in the eye. "The Vance name?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, colder than his had ever been. "Let's talk about the Vance name, Father. Is the family honor in trying to coerce your daughter into committing a federal crime to protect a corrupt business associate? Or is it in writing her out of your will because she chose a different path? Tell me. I'd love to understand your definition of honor." His face went from red to pale. The accusations, spoken aloud with such clarity, left him speechless. He had no defense against the truth. It was Caitlin who stepped forward then, her face pale and streaked with tears. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked look. "Evie, I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching a hand out to me. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know the extent of it." I looked at her outstretched hand but made no move to take it. The apology felt hollow, a last-ditch effort to salvage something from the ruins. "You didn't know?" I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Or you didn't want to know, Caitlin? Which is it? All my life you just needed me to be the failure, so you could be the star. You needed my quietness to make your ambition seem more brilliant. You were never my sister. You were my competitor, my warden." Every word was a truth I had swallowed for decades, and now they were out, sharp and undeniable. She flinched as if struck, her hand falling back to her side. She had nothing to say because she knew it was true. The foundation of our entire relationship had been built on that toxic dynamic, and I had just demolished it. "I am not the one who brought dishonor to this family," I said, my gaze shifting back to my stunned father. "I am the one who cleaned up the mess." I slowly, deliberately pulled the sapphire ring from my finger, the ring from General Thompson, the symbol of my true legacy. I held it in my palm, the metal cool against my skin. "You were right about one thing, Father," I said, holding his gaze. "That diamond heirloom ring, it isn't for me, because I don't belong to your world anymore. I don't subscribe to your version of legacy." I turned my back on them both, on the years of pain and quiet suffering, and walked towards the door. "Evelyn, wait!" my father called out, a note of desperation in his voice now. But it was too late. "From now on," I said, pausing with my hand on the door but not turning around, "do not contact me, either of you." I walked out into the long, anonymous corridor of the Pentagon and didn't look back, leaving them standing alone amidst the wreckage they had created. Walking through the parking garage, the cool, concrete-scented air felt clean. A profound sense of release washed over me, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The war was over. I had won. But as I got into my car and the adrenaline began to fade, the victory felt hollow. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a vast, quiet emptiness. I had won the war, burned the bridges, and saved myself. But now, standing alone in the aftermath, I had to figure out what came next. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a vast, quiet emptiness. I had won the war, burned the bridges, and saved myself. But now, standing alone in the wreckage of my former life, I had to figure out what came next. The weeks that followed the hearing were a blur of debriefings and reports. The directorate moved swiftly to dismantle Gallo's network, and the political fallout for my father's associate, Robert Taggart, was immediate and severe. I heard through back channels that my father had resigned from all his advisory boards. The Vance name, once a shield of honor, had become a liability. I felt nothing hearing this news, not satisfaction, not pity, just a profound, hollow distance. A few months later, on a crisp autumn day, a small private memorial service was held for General Thompson at Arlington National Cemetery. It was to mark the anniversary of his death during Operation Winter Sun. There were no press, no politicians. Only a handful of us from the directorate stood among the endless rows of white headstones. The quiet dignity of the place, the rustling of fallen leaves, and the distant, mournful sound of taps being played for another fallen soldier created a sense of solemn peace. I stood before his simple, elegant headstone, the same as all the others, and placed a single white rose at its base. Elias Thorne stood beside me, his weathered face impassive but his presence a solid comfort. Looking at the small group assembled, Madsen, Diaz, Chen, and a few other senior operatives, I realized I wasn't alone. This was my family now, a family forged not by blood, but by shared secrets, mutual respect, and a silent, unwavering commitment to a cause larger than ourselves. As we stood in a moment of silence, Thorne placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of solidarity, a quiet acknowledgement of a shared loss and a shared purpose. When I returned to my apartment that afternoon, there was a single piece of mail in my box that wasn't a bill or junk mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, my name written on the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. Though I hadn't seen it in years, it was from Caitlin. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let that world touch this newfound sense of peace. But curiosity, or perhaps some final lingering thread of connection, made me open it. The letter inside, written on heavy stationery, was not the rambling, self-serving apology I had expected. It was short, direct, and startlingly honest. She wrote that she had refused to accept the heirloom diamond ring from our father. She told me she had put in for a transfer to the Pacific Fleet, as far from DC and the family's influence as she could get. The letter ended with a few simple, powerful sentences. "You were right about everything, Evie. I spent my whole life competing with a ghost, and I never stopped to see the person who was actually there. I need to find out who I am without the Vance name weighing me down. I hope you find your peace." It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a declaration of independence. It was, in its own way, a final quiet goodbye. I folded the letter and put it away, a strange mix of sadness and relief settling over me. The bridge was well and truly burned, but perhaps on the other side, we could both finally start to build something new for ourselves. The following spring, I bought a small, rustic cabin nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, not far from Ravenwood. It was made of dark wood with a wide porch and a stone fireplace. It was the first place that ever truly felt like mine. One cool morning, I stood on that porch, a warm ceramic mug of black coffee in my hands, and watched the sun rise over the misty valley. The air was clean and cold, and the only sound was the chirping of birds. The sapphire ring, General Thompson's ring, was back on my finger. It felt different now, not a burden or a secret, but a quiet, comfortable part of me. I was no longer the broken Evie, desperate for approval, nor was I the cold, calculating Anya running on rage. I was just Evelyn, a woman who had walked through fire and found a quiet strength on the other side. My legacy wasn't the one my father had tried to force upon me, a legacy of names and portraits in gilded frames. My legacy was silent. It was in the operations I ran, the threats I neutralized, the lives that were safe because of the work I did in the shadows. It wasn't a legacy that would ever be carved in stone, but it was real. The sun climbed higher, flooding the valley with golden light. The ghosts of the past were quiet now, not gone, but finally at peace. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I looked towards the future not as something to be endured, but as something to be built. I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. My journey taught me that true peace doesn't come from a family's approval, but from accepting your own path and finding the courage to walk it. It's a quiet strength, a legacy built in silence. If any part of my story resonated with the strength you've found in your own life, I would be honored if you'd leave a blue heart in the comments to share that peaceful energy with others. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories of quiet resilience waiting to be told, and I want to share them with you.